Welcome back everyone to another ASMR video. And today we will finish up the God of War 20th Anniversary Retrospective with the second half of the Norse Edition book. And we are at Part 2, God of War Ragnarok, November 9th, 2022. The torch passes again. When Shannon Studstill, head of Santa Monica Studio, started recruiting Cory Barlog in 2013 to revive the God of War franchise and help revitalize the studio's culture, she also targeted Eric Williams for the reboot kickoff team. As combat systems designer and a key consultant on previous God of War titles, including the 2 PSP games, Williams could bring in a deep well of institutional knowledge. He also worked exceptionally well with Barlog. Cory and Eric were like brothers, with everything that entails, said Studstill with a laugh. They could disagree vehemently about some design issue, then just shelve it, go to lunch, and talk sports or whatever. On God of War, Eric really had Cory's back on most of the tougher, more controversial design choices, and helped architect them. And although Williams was well known as a detail-oriented technical expert in his specialty of combat, design, Barlog also valued his overall creative instincts and how well he grasped the full spectrum of the development process, basically a game director's skills. Even back in the Greek days, Eric wasn't just siloed in combat design, says Barlog. On God of War 2, directed by Barlog, he was like a co-director at times when I needed that. I could count on him to help me with other teams across the board. He saw how all the pieces fit together. So, after shipping God of War in 2018, when Barlog decided to hop out of the day-to-day production trenches for the planned sequel, a key part of his withdrawal strategy was to convince Williams to succeed him as game director. Williams admits that he kept saying no for 6 months. I like the freedom and variety of being an outside consultant, he says. For years, he'd been consulting on numerous titles as Short Super LLC. But Barlog and Studstill kept pushing until he finally agreed to take up the challenge. And here you see Eric Williams and Shannon Studstill in a photo right here. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but it is thundering pretty loudly outside, so I apologize for that. Funny thing though, and this is Cory in a nutshell, adds Williams. He told me, look, I know you can be a director. I just don't know if you'll be any good at it, he laughs. So yeah, we're brothers like that. We expect nothing but brutal honesty from each other. As it turned out, Barlog to Williams wasn't the only succession faced by the studio. As God of War Ragnarok was gearing up in January 2020, Studstill decided to step away from the studio. Scott Rode, Sony Interactive Entertainment's head of internal production, admits it was a blow. He attributed the studio's remarkable God of War resurgence to Studstill's leadership, particularly her keen cultivation of top-notch talent. But he also praised her decision to hand off the reins to Yumi Yang. Shannon, Cory, and I all agreed that Yumi was the only logical replacement, adds Rode. It was a perfect transition, really. Shannon had the long-term vision. Then Yumi stepped in and said, okay, we've got to get this game done, let's get cracking. Thus, not one but 2 blazing torches were passed. But in keeping with God of War tradition, the handoffs were internal, made to longtime veterans, each with more than 15 years in the franchise. Back in 2005, on David Jaffe's original God of War, Yang was an associate producer, Williams a combat systems guy. The new design director, Jason McDonald, had been on God of War projects for 15 years too. Like Williams, he'd spent nearly a decade in combat design, then moved over to lead the gameplay design team for the God of War reboot. Other key assignments for God of War Ragnarok kept that grand custom alive as well. Numerous positions across departments remained in the hands of talented pros with many combined decades of God of War experience. All this cumulative expertise eased some of the pressure of developing a sequel worthy of its award-winning predecessor. And as development kicked off in early 2019, having such a veteran crew would prove even more valuable, given the unprecedented challenges that 2020 would soon present to not only Santa Monica Studio, but the entire world. Here it shows Stanton Studstill, Alan Becker, and Yumi Yang, and they pose with Greek-era Kratos in the Santa Monica studio lobby. And here it says greatness. Production flow and efficiency is certainly important in game development, but if you want a truly great game, you start with great talent. Recruit the right creators, then build a supportive structure around those people. I always saw that as the essence of my job, says Shannon Studstill, head of Santa Monica Studio, from 2011 to 2020. And then here we have Shannon Studstill addresses the Santa Monica Studio team up here and down here. Inside look, a director's debts. Remarkably, though there have been 10 installments in the God of War franchise, including the 3 handheld titles plus Valhalla, the DLC epilogue to God of War Ragnarok, only one director has helmed more than one title in the series, Cory Barlog, who directed both God of War 2 2007 and the God of War reboot in 2018. However, God of War Ragnarok director Eric Williams worked extensively on most of his predecessor's titles and gratefully recognizes the debt of knowledge gained from each one of them. He came to game development as a young designer at Paradox Development, drawn to combat systems. I love fighting games, he says. I grew up playing Street Fighter in the arcades. His knowledge of the genre was so deep that Brady Games hired him to co-author strategy guides for Paradox's series of X-Men fighting games in the early 2000s. When he came to Santa Monica Studio in 2004, the natural move was to join the God of War combat team. So, my learning curve started with David Chaffee, watching him steer that very first God of War title, says Williams. David had a very what-if kind of design mentality. He was always willing to push boundaries and connect dots that others may not see. That inspired people to see things differently, to consider possibilities that may seem unlikely at first. On that title, Williams also worked directly with animation lead Cory Barlog, another Paradox Development alum. Their partnership at Paradox, creating and animating combat moves, had carried over into God of War. So when Barlog was named game director for God of War 2, and Williams became lead combat systems designer, the two already had a long and very fruitful working relationship. I've learned so much from Cory over the years, says Williams. One of the first great lessons was, all motion should have intention. Cory believes there's no reason to just move things around if there's no clear benefit to the story. Williams also worked with Stig Asmussen on the first 2 God of War titles, and did consulting work for him on God of War 3. Stig's background was environment artist. His in-game levels were so amazing. They always seemed to breathe and live, says Williams. He brought that same quality to the way he directed scenes in 3. Watching Stig, I saw how important everything was on screen, and how a thoughtful, well-composed world design could inject energy and meaning into your story and gameplay. Williams also recounts how Todd Pappy, game director on God of War Ascension, started as a brilliant level designer who was a master of pertinent details. Todd really knew how to path players dynamically through a game, says Williams. He instinctively knew how to incentivize and reward you. His levels always kept you so engaged and moving forward, you're always intrigued and can't wait to see what's next. Finally, Williams expresses his admiration for the 2 directors of Ready at Dawn's PSP titles, Ruru Surya, Chains of Olympus, and Dana Jan, Ghost of Sparta. He notes how both came to gaming from art backgrounds. Consulting with them, says Williams, I learned a ton about color theory, how it enhances the mood and feel of every scene, and how to compose things on the screen to leverage that. Thus, in the end, Williams acknowledges how this long line of succession helped prepare him for the helm on God of War Ragnarok, and incidentally earn him nominations from both DICE and the Game Awards for Best Game Direction in 2022. All these guys became sounding boards in my head, helping me process different aspects of every scene, he says. All those years, I rode shotgun with them. I was learning how it's done. I can't thank them enough. Servicing your ecosystem. After God of War's resounding success in 2018 assured Sony that a sequel would be eagerly anticipated, the company granted a multi-month transition window for SMS dev team members staying on for the next title. Studio leadership arranged handoff sessions where people stepping up into new roles could pass on knowledge of their previous role, including a written job guide. Cory Barlog gave Eric Williams, his successor as game director, a single piece of paper with just one word written on it: everything. Meanwhile, Santa Monica Studio faced a weighty pair of choices. First up, would the Norse cycle of titles be a trilogy, as had often been assumed, both internally and externally? Any decision on how many sequels to make would obviously impact every level of development planning and production. Cory Barlog, serving in his new role as studio-level creative director, overseeing all SMS projects, stepped up quickly to make the call. This next title, God of War Ragnarok, would wrap up the Norse saga, making the Norse era just 2 games instead of 3. And this is Brock and Sindri's house that they live in. It's sort of like your world hub in a sense in Ragnarok. The complexity of a AAA game development, plus our own insanely high standards, meant each game was taking 4 to 5 years to complete, says Barlog. So, after God of War came out, we thought, man, 2 more games. That seems too long to tell what is essentially a single story. Because despite the density of this Norse world we were building, our narrative core was still that father-son relationship. Kratos and Atreus. It was asking too much for our fans to wait another decade for a resolution. Some on the God of War Ragnarok team had mixed feelings about the decision, especially with the game's scope expanding to include all 9 Norse realms, important new characters, and a massively apocalyptic final showdown. But in the end, the time span for the fan argument hit home. A second big fan-related issue was whether to develop the sequel for only the sleek new PlayStation 5 system that would launch in November 2020, or to simultaneously build a version for the venerable PlayStation 4. A blockbuster PS5-only title like God of War Ragnarok would certainly spur Sony console sales, but adding a PS4 version would service an existing base of more than 100 million users. Financially, the scale had weight on both sides. Inside look, good to go. I had to wrap up some things on God of War, release all the patches, stabilize the game, and so forth, for a few months before I finally joined the God of War Ragnarok team. By the time I got there, it was already decided we'd wrap up the Norse cycle in just 1 more game, not a trilogy. It seemed a bit ambitious, but knowing Eric like I do, if Eric is saying yes to that, well, I trust him completely. Eric's process is always very precise, so I had no doubt we'd get it all done and done perfectly. Not that there wasn't trepidation, but Eric got us into a well-defined formation very quickly. Who's doing what and how. I remember early on he sent a 6-page email to JMac and me. It was like, here's the high-level retention staff. High-level retention stuff we're not going to mess with. Here's what I want to see for Kratos. Here's what I want from Atreus. Here's what I want for traversal, for the realms, for the cast, for the big set-piece stuff. I mean, he had mapped all this out in his head. And we read that email and we're like, all right, we're good to go. Jeet Schroff, gameplay director on God of War Ragnarok. Here's the PS4 God of War Ragnarok packaging. But for Eric Williams, who pushed hard for the two-version option, there was another important consideration: loyalty and service to the fan community. It was the kid from Ohio in me, he says, the one mowing lawns all summer just to afford that one game I wanted. To me, that's your ecosystem. We had so many loyal God of War fans with PS4s. Did we want to make them drop $500 to play God of War Ragnarok? As it turned out, the 2020-21 pandemic supply chain madness made it impossible for many gamers to procure PS5s for many, many months. Thus, Sony's ultimate decision to co-develop PS4 and PS5 versions for the initial release proved fortuitous in both the short and long term. Millions of gamers isolating at home because of COVID-19 had an expansive, uplifting universe to explore, creating a lot of goodwill. With those two big matters resolved, the God of War Ragnarok team was ready in January 2019 to start climbing the mountain again. Williams remembers being struck by a quote from Jill Ellis, head coach of the U.S. women's national soccer team, who was preparing her squad for that summer's World Cup. They were defending champs. They'd been to the mountaintops, says Williams. But as Ellis put it, the summit is rarefied air. Mountaintops are small, and the air is thin for a reason, because you are not supposed to dwell there. It's rented space. You get up there, enjoy the view briefly, and must climb again. So you come back down, rebuild your base camp, and gear up for the long haul back to the top. It's just as hard, maybe harder to climb it again, adds Williams. But you know what's up there. You've seen it. That gives you a motivation and an edge that maybe no one else has. Inside look, show us the gods. Along with Eric, we all know we needed to deliver twice the game as God of War in 2018 to fulfill expectations. On schedules, number of characters, number of realms and spaces. It was 2 times everything we built before, and that was scary. I guess some people thought, hey, 2018's world comes for free, so we'll just build on top of those assets. But of course, that wasn't the case. We had to rework assets because the engine was changing. We were trying to ship for PlayStation 5. I was actually happy when I learned the Norse cycle wasn't going to be a trilogy. All the stuff I was excited about, Kratos facing the big Norse gods, Thor and Odin, Asgard, Valheim, all the Ragnarok showdowns. I just didn't want to wait another 6 or 7 years for a third game to do that. Let's bring those characters to life now. Let's show people all these gods. As art director, my job was to convince everyone that this would be awesome. But it was easy, because that's exactly how I felt about it. A favorite addition to the franchise, Angrboda and Ironwood. That character was a fantastic left curve. We talked about creating 80s fantasy storybook visuals, selling that sort of dark crystal look. Lots of fairyland wildlife, lush flora and fauna. Making Ironwood a habitat you'd love to get lost in. It was fun delivering on that. Ralph Grassetti, art director on God of War Ragnarok. Wrapping up the story. The same pair of writers who worked with Barlog on God of War in 2018, Matt Sophos and Rich Gobbard, oversaw God of War Ragnarok's narrative development, bringing thematic and stylistic continuity to the sequel. The two had done most of the line writing on God of War, but as its side quests, travel banter, lore text, boat tales, and other subsidiary scenes kept accruing, their workload grew to be overwhelming. Eventually, they had to bring in some writing help. Matt and I went to school on that experience, says Gobbard. We knew God of War Ragnarok would have a considerably wider scope. We spent a year getting the main story path and character arcs hammered out and locked down in weekly meetings with Eric. Once we'd assembled a skeleton, we started building a team of talented writers to help put flesh on the bones. Sophos and Gobbard would assign a scene to a writer that included a basic outline of elements, the action, conflict, character growth, and story themes to be reinforced in that scene. Every level would feature a central thematic argument, and then, by the end, the resolution we wanted to see, says Sophos. This way, he says, the writing process would keep moving forward. We could worry about massaging the dialogue later. And here above, you have Matt Sophos and Rich Gobbert inside the writer's room, the office where the writing team works while on site at the Playa Vista campus. All things great and small. Maybe because I'm from the Midwest, I find slice-of-life stories, common, mundane, everyday personal things, just as interesting and meaningful as big world events. I admired how Matt and Rich and their story team created this layered narrative for God of War Ragnarok, where those levels of life, the earth-shaking events and the everyday events, collide and interact and all seem equally important, because the way I see it, they are equally important. And that's from Eric Williams, game director. My Ragnarok and yours. Yes, Ragnarok is a cataclysmic event, but we all have our own personal Ragnaroks to deal with. Sometimes you face a personal apocalypse. Maybe your life melts down. Our story is about how you process that, how you own it, how you make it a part of yourself and grow from it. And that's from Richard Gobbert, lead writer. Here it shows the cover treatment for God of War Lore and Legends, modeled after Atreus' in-game journal as seen in God of War 2018. And then to the right down here, Michael Hamilton, Rich Gobbert, and Matt Sophos in the internal space of the Playa Vista campus. Sophos adds that while Williams was less involved than Barlog with the writing process itself, the director had a well-defined vision of the big picture and the emotional impact he wanted. With Corey, it was, 3 writers finding our way together, says Sophos. With Eric, it was more like 2 writers and a designer with a capital D. He was very clear and exact about what he wanted to see in the big story beats, but gave us a lot of freedom in crafting how to get there. Sometimes he provided these perfect reference points from other story sources for guidance. Before any individual writer's scene was handed off for production, Gobbert would take a careful unification pass to make sure the character voices were right and the theme was on point. Then Sophos, who worked more directly with the actors, providing narrative direction in the VO booth or on the mocap stage, would make a final pass to prepare notes for the performance session. Over the course of developing scene and character banter content, the core script grew to more than 3,000 pages, with hundreds more pages generated for in-game resources like the bestiary, item, artifact, gear, and lore text. Inside look, family affairs. During story review sessions with game director Eric Williams, narrative leads Matt Sophos and Richard Gobbert would pitch ideas from their writing team for side missions. During one meeting, Williams asked that any new quests be rooted in family themes. This whole series is about family, he told them. Blood family, found family, whatever. I think even the exploration content should reflect that. And so it did. As it turned out, the entire Norse saga's focus on familial relationships spawned a fascinating array of intersecting character arcs beyond Kratos and Atreus, arising from variations on the family theme: parent-child, Freya Balder, Odin Thor, Thor Magni, Modi, Thor Thrud, Gria and Graboda, sibling rivalry, Brock Sindri, Freya Freyr, Emperor partner dynamics, Kratos Frey, Odin Freya, Atreus and Graboda, Thor Sif. Alistair Duncan, the actor who plays Mimir, notes how the family theme profoundly enriched the experience of his own performance. Hanging his head on a belt, Mimir could have been just some annoying know-it-all appendage, or maybe a joker. But by Ragnarok, he says, when Mimir calls Kratos brother, again and again, he really means it. They're not just friends, they develop a deeper brotherly bond. Same with Atreus, adds Duncan. Mimir becomes this caring grandfatherly figure. He loves the boy, found family. It's a beautiful thing. Inside look, the Becker-Sand process. When I joined Santa Monica Studio in 2001 as a producer, I came from MGM and its interdisciplinary structures of physical production, so I was looking to apply those structures to game development. To me, it was a very clear analog. Coming off Kinetica, it was evident the studio needed to develop those types of specialized, craft-oriented, interdisciplinary teams. Also, Alan Becker, the studio founder, had this vision of a discovery-oriented studio. I mean, we were looking for a new IP, which is a very creative, high-risk, iterative kind of process. Alan had the foresight to put us in Los Angeles, in the heart of so much entertainment infrastructure and services, because he saw how commingling across craft specialties would define the future of the game industry. So we organized these pod-based structures, mixing multiple disciplines, setting them up to work together, side by side. Your game improves if you're collaborating in close physical proximity to all these other specialists, since the nature of game development pulls all those people to you anyway. So, multiple lanes of talent, all managing their crafts, organized with the belief that the creative process is improved by sitting directly next to the craft people of other disciplines. I remember when I first came to the studio, somebody had sketched this concept art of Alan. He's in a monk's robe floating. He was so great at seeing the studio holistically, keeping this loose but very important structure around the creative chaos. When I took the torch from Shannon as SMS studio head on God of War Ragnarok, I always kept Alan's vision in my head, just like Shannon did before me. His foundational philosophy still permeates the studio. And that was from Yumi Yang, the studio head during God of War Ragnarok. Note, Alan Becker's legacy lives on at Santa Monica Studio in the form of a conference room named Becker-san, the Japanese honorific version of his surname. Many studio veterans still refer to him as the Zen Master. Here you have Shannon Studstill and Alan Becker in front of the Becker-san conference room. New Realms, Gods, and Monsters. Here you have Dela Longfish and Eric Valdez in the Playa Vista campus kitchen during the God of War Ragnarok launch week. Although Eric Williams and his art director, Ralph Grassetti, encouraged the concept art teams under co-leads Dela Longfish, who did characters, and Luke Berliner, who did environments, to craft their own takes on God of War Ragnarok's new regions and inhabitants, everyone understood the importance of adhering to God of War's signature blend of myth and realism. We always wanted to match the authentic quality of the storytelling, explains Grassetti. Yes, it's fantasy, but very grounded fantasy. Longfish notes how collaborative the process was in hashing out visual concepts. We talked to the directors and writers to get an initial sense of any new character, like Tyr or Freyr or Durlin, he says. Sometimes we'd research the myths in the original Norse texts, if applicable, and Matt and Rich, the narrative leads, would give us dialogue excerpts to help us envision the speaker and meet the story's needs. Other times, the artist would focus more on bigger thematic aspects for a concept look. The fire giant Suitor, for example, as the fiery designated agent of the apocalypse. And of course, Longfish and his team would consult with the combat designers to brainstorm on specific fighting features for various enemy classes, such as Odin's imposing Einar warriors, or monsters and bosses like Gralia and Heimdall. We'd work up anywhere from 5 to 15 pieces for each entity, like a sample platter for the directors, says Longfish. Finally, in special cases, the character art was also inspired by the specific actor cast in the role. Obvious examples of the two principal Asgardian figures, Odin and Thor, whose character models clearly resemble Richard Schiff and Ryan Hurst, respectively. Same with the new Jotnar character, Angrboda. Some of the early pre-casting art concepts bore a passing resemblance to Leia DeLeon Hayes, says Longfish. But after Hayes won the Angrboda role, the creative team decided she was a perfect template for the in-game character. On the environment side, Luke Berliner's team was dedicated to the goal of fashioning a distinctive identity for each realm. Their tasks included exploring concepts for realms not yet seen in the Norse cycle, new regions within the realms already visited in God of War, and Fimbulwinter's radical transformation of once familiar settings in Midgard, like the newly frozen Lake of Nine. Our story featured plenty of new places players hadn't seen before, of course, says Eric Williams. But we also wanted to revisit locations from 2018, the last game, and make sure they felt as fresh as possible. Each new realm was designed with a distinct, coherent theme. For example, Svartalheim featured the industrial qualities you'd expect from a land of dwarven miners and smiths. Great rigs, forges, smelters, pit mines, cave systems, waterways. As always, the concept team drew from extensive research, looking for mythic elements grounded in real-world context. We studied mining infrastructure in old California, geothermal features in Iceland and Yellowstone, the sulfur springs of Ethiopia, says Berliner. Svartalheim's centerpiece was the great waterfront city of Nidelver, inspired by the classic cliffside towns of Italy. Its architecture incorporated armor-smithing concepts, buildings resembling dwarven war helmets or chain-mail chest plates. Meanwhile, the designs of Vanheim and Asgard called for stark contrast based on the two godly tribes who inhabit the realms, the Vanir and Aesir. Our Vanir gods are like hippie mages, deeply connected to the rhythms of nature, and so their realm reflects that sort of natural organic mysticism, says Dan McKim, environment art lead. The Aesir are like a Norse biker gang, partying hard and addicted to the glories of battle. Thus, Vanheim featured dense jungle biomes and towering trees with traversable roots and branches, a wild, verdant tangle infused with gameplay possibilities. Asgard, on the other hand, reflected classic Viking aesthetics, drawing its imagery from one of the great warrior cultures in history, a city of angular, sloping roofs dominated by Odin's Grand Lodge, a variation of the Viking longhouse, and surrounded by the massive bulk of Hermithur's Wall. How to make a rock. This studio is unique, I think, in how deeply we research historical aspects of our environment and how grounded in real-world sources we design our assets before we add our own magical spin. Our philosophy on art in general is, if you have really good source data and sculpted assets, it's hard to screw up the end result. For God of War Ragnarok, we try to sculpt everything in our environments, the same way a character artist sculpts a character. If we're making a brick wall, instead of taking a photo of a wall, then running it through some filters, like back in the day, when things ended up looking flat, we use real data to sculpt every single brick into a 3D model. So each brick is a full interpretation in 3D form of that physical real-life asset. Then we use those bricks to build the wall. It adds an extraordinary layer of depth, crisp and realistic. The tech now is amazing. Photogrammetry can extract 3D information from photographs of real-world objects. The process snaps hundreds or even thousands of overlapping photos of something like a rock, shots taken from every conceivable angle. Software then interpolates the images, creating a digital 3D form called a 3D point cloud to make a very real-looking rock asset. And that was from Dan McKim, the environment art lead. The artists also added new regions to realms previously visited in 2018. In Jotunheim, the story called for Atreus' discovery of a well-hidden sanctuary known as Ironwood, a lush fantasy marshland heavily forested with a diverse array of flora and fauna. A foray into Alfheim's desert barrens featured a dry ocean with great creatures from the dune seas, reinforcing the concept. A return to the molten rivers of Muspelheim expanded on its fiery panorama of searing lava, ash, and flame flowing around massive fire giant structures. Concept studies of Niflheim depicted a land of sweeping vistas with icy frost fields and primordial ruins in bluish hues, seemingly frozen into stillness by the realm's famous mists. And finally, Helheim's jagged ice formations and greenish, angular structures were designed in contrast to Niflheim's more swooping shapes, creating a bleaker look for the realm of the dead. Berliner says it helped that most of the environment art drew from God of War returned for God of War Ragnarok. Working with such amazingly talented artists, people you absolutely trust over such a long period of time, that really led to a cohesive vision of this Norse world as it spread across 2 huge games, he says. The game industry clearly admired that artistic vision as well. God of War Ragnarok won the 26th annual DICE Award for Outstanding Achievement in Art Direction and garnered nominations for Best Visual Art, Game Developers' Choice Awards, Artistic Achievement, the BAFTA Games Awards, and Best Art Direction, the Game Awards. Here it shows, for a more comprehensive survey of God of War Ragnarok's widely acclaimed and award-winning art direction, we highly recommend you check out The Art of God of War Ragnarok that came out in 2022 from Dark Horse Books. The book features samples of the studio's magnificent concept art, accompanied by observations from the artists who fashioned the game's visual language. We have some more art here. Looks like he's battling a frost giant type of person there. I forget exactly what you would call that. Inside look. All 8s make a 10. When our art director left the team during God of War, Dila Longfish and I took the reins of the art team and split up the leadership tasks. Dila focused on character art, and I was the environments guy. It worked so well that we kept that co-equal lead structure for God of War Ragnarok. Now we're a 360-facing team that provides support across the entire VSDev visual development group. For God of War Ragnarok, we were super excited to dive into the new realms like Vanheim, Asgard, and Svartalheim. The challenge was to make each realm unique while maintaining a cohesive overall feel for the Norse world. Aside from all the leadership and support work, I got to focus on Sindri's house in the realm between realms. One of my sketches became the basis for that location. That was a real high point for me. You know, Eric Williams used to go around the department saying, all 8s make a 10. That is, if you can get every individual thing you do up to at least a level 8, then the overall product will be a 10. I think we exceeded that goal on this game. And that's coming from Luke Berliner, the concept art lead on God of War Ragnarok. And here it shows Raphael Grassetti, Sean Kyo, Stephen Oakley, Yefim Klingerman, and Luke Berliner on the Playa Vista campus kitchen during God of War Ragnarok launch week. Some more pictures and art here as well. Anything that moves. Before we get into that, right here we have Mehdi Yesuf at his desk at the Playa Vista campus. Got some awards here on this page. For God of War Ragnarok, studio animation director Bruno Velasquez and his 2 lead animators, Mehdi Yesuf, gameplay, and Erica Pinto, narrative, hauled an immense truckload of experience into the project. All 3 were already grizzled God of War veterans and longtime mainstays of the SMS Animation Group. Velasquez came aboard in 2006 for God of War 2. He also started even earlier, joining the studio in 2003 as a junior animator for the original God of War. And Pinto started in 2011 as a cinematic animator for God of War Ascension. Together they oversaw the teams that produced the stunning award-winning animation of God of War Ragnarok. Our job is to depict the movement of essentially anything that moves in the game, and do it with perfect timing and pacing, says Velasquez. I mean, you can't motion capture a dragon, right? Somebody talented has to imagine and animate how these creatures move. That's what we do. Yusuf points out how the skill sets for animators differ from narrative to gameplay action. Narrative animation often focuses on tweaking intricate details of the face to drive emotion, he says, whereas gameplay is more about bodies in motion, hitting the big poses right, making sure all movement looks and feels natural. In interviews, both Velasquez and Yusuf recall how the sheer volume of animation slated for God of War Ragnarok, as compared to its predecessor, was daunting at first. Double the cast of characters, a significantly expanded bestiary of enemy varieties, and a labor-extensive set of weapon-specific finishing moves, but both also rave about the stellar work put in by their teams. It may sound like bragging, but it's totally true that our so-called junior animators are better than the senior people at most other studios, says Yusuf. Velasquez agrees. Our track record lets us be pretty picky about who we hire, and for God of War Ragnarok we found some truly amazing young talent. The results certainly speak for themselves. God of War Ragnarok won the 2023 BAFTA Games Award for animation, as well as the 26th Annual DICE Award for Outstanding Achievement in Animation. Velasquez's team also snagged a nomination for Best Character Animation at the prestigious Annie Awards. Inside Look, Finding a Kratos. We animators were so lucky to find Eric Jacobus, a guy we discovered on YouTube, demonstrating these crazy Tekken in real-life moves. Searching for a mocap actor to play Kratos in combat, we'd started with a bunch of people physically built like our Kratos model. Big guys, football players, and UFC fighters. The football players were all too slow, and the UFC fighting style didn't work for our purposes. For game animation, you need theatrics, big wind-ups and such. Real fighters don't do that, for good reason. But then we found Eric, who was a stuntman. Once we got him in a mocap suit, we had our guy. As a martial artist and former gymnast, he can execute unbelievable moves, running, fighting, traversal, or just walking or chilling in place. Eric did all the gameplay action moves for Kratos in both Norse games. Chris Judge, of course, did the mocap for all the cinematic scenes. Back in 2003, my job at another game company ended when my project got canceled after 26 days. As an immigrant from an Arab country after 9/11, I had one day to find another job or I'd lose my visa. Before 9/11, you got 3 months. Well, my employment agent called me the very next morning with an interview at Santa Monica studio. So I went, did some tests, met Dave Jaffe. After I got hired, I heard that Dave had pushed for me. So I'll always be grateful to him for that. I've been at the studio 21 years now. And that's coming from Mehdi Yusuf, gameplay animator lead on God of War Ragnarok. Game design, the systems, the sled, and the spear. Compressing the balance of God of War's Norseland saga into a single sequel meant God of War Ragnarok was going to be the size of a Jotun mountain. The SMS design teams inherited a solid base of PS4 technical knowledge and intimate familiarity with God of War's groundbreaking features, such as the one-shot camera and companion character dynamics. But the decision to develop such a massive game for a simultaneous cross-generational release on both the PS4 and the PS5 meant a lot of heavy lifting for the engineering team as God of War Ragnarok spun up into production. Making matters worse for technical director Josh Hobson was an exodus of tech talent from the studio in the early days of 2019. There was an industry-wide gold rush on rendering programmers and tools people back then, he says. We lost some good tenured people. But Hobson credits studio head Yumi Yang with proactive leadership in weathering that poaching storm. Robust recruiting efforts helped Hobson rebuild a God of War Ragnarok engineering team that ended up winning Best Technology at the 23rd Game Developers' Choice Awards, as well as being nominated for technical achievement at both the BAFTA and DICE Awards in 2023. I don't know what to attribute our success to, other than we just busted our butts, looked hard and far, and maintained the highest standards as Hobson. Yumi helped me assemble what I think is the strongest engineering team this studio has ever had. People like Steve McCauley, the lead rendering programmer, and Vadim Slurisiv, lead engine pipeline programmer. We also found great co-development partners like Jetpack Interactive. With a solid team in place, the studio embraced the dual console challenge. John Burke, gameplay technical director, says, "Our goal was always to give PS4 players the version of God of War Ragnarok we'd make if the PS5 didn't exist. No cutting corners. The PS5 version, of course, would layer on advanced features like higher frame rates, 3D audio, enhanced graphics and textures, and state-of-the-art haptic feedback in the console and the controls. But as animation director Bruno Velasquez explains, we bent over backward to push the PS4 to the max and make sure the game would be essentially the same experience on both consoles. The extra stuff for PS5 was great, of course. It was icing on the cake." High caliber tech hiring. Our hiring standards work on two levels. Both are equally important. First, we have a collection of very, very capable and driven people at this studio, so you really have to be a first-rate engineer just to keep up. But then we also have a strict no-ask-something policy. Genius jerks just aren't worth it. We've turned down brilliant people whose impact on the team would have been a net negative. Once you're in, though, we give you a lot of autonomy. Roles are organic and somewhat self-determined, even a bit ambiguous. That has advantages and disadvantages. It makes us a big herd of cats sometimes. It can be very stressful. Trust and chaos can go hand in hand, but everybody has the freedom to excel. In the end, I think, that always leads to greater things for the project. And that was from Josh Hobson, the technical director. I want a wolf sled. In gameplay programming, we're always looking for those general improvements. How can we boost frame rate, make the game more stable, make it a better experience for players? But sometimes tasks become very feature specific. For example, Eric came to us one day and said, "I want a wolf-drawn sled you can ride on, and it should feel like a fun toy." Apparently, one of the animators had just gone dog sledding, and suddenly everyone loved that idea. But of course, we'd replace dogs with wolves. Whenever Eric proposes a high-level concept, he always has a very clear sense of how he wants the thing to feel. And so then we figure out how it's technically possible to capture that feeling. How dynamic can we make the sledding? Which gameplay pillars do we lean on? And where can we find efficiency without losing the fun? Do we have combat on the sled? Can I throw my axe from the sled? In the end, we decided that feeling like a toy was the thing we would not compromise on. We didn't want our wolf sled to be just a vehicle to get from A to B or just a combat platform. We wanted players to have freedom and full control, to enjoy all the swerving and sliding and skidding around the lake ice. Just how cool it feels in your hand. That tactile sensation was on the controller. Extensive game testing totally confirmed Eric's fun toy approach. Players really love just spinning around the ice on that sled. That's from John Burke, the gameplay technical director. As for God of War Ragnarok's combat design, Mihir Chef faced a challenging dynamic in his new role as team lead. Both the game director Eric Williams and Chef's direct boss, design director Jason McDonald, were industry legends as combat designers on previous God of War titles, going back to the original in 2005. As you can imagine, laughs Chef, when your project leadership is very knowledgeable about the minute details of your work, it can be a little intimidating. The upside, he says, was their in-depth understanding of his design issues and needs. We spoke the same language. And like Chef in his new role, both directors had once been directly responsible for Kratos' playability. A hallowed stewardship. When you own that hero character, says Chef, it's special. He notes an added benefit. Kratos is so central to the entire God of War experience that you end up touching all aspects of game design across the board. You see the nature of the beast, all the moving parts, how the game is made, he says. Chef's team confronted several weighty issues. First and foremost, adding a new primary weapon to Kratos' personal arsenal. Eric came to me and said, "Hey, we're doing a spear," says Chef. I was like, "Sweet, I love spears." The design of the Draupnir spear, a versatile weapon with some truly innovative features, became a major contribution to the series and its hero's combat profile. Inside look, community wisdom. A key story mission in God of War Ragnarok is devoted to forging the Draupnir spear, with Brock serving as Kratos' guide and companion in Svartalheim. Gathering a bag of howling wind to imbue the spear, the dwarf utters a classic line: "The nature of a thing's more important than the form of a thing." Later, Brock delivers a remarkable benediction when asked by Kratos to bless the newly forged spear. "May this weapon strike true. May it be wielded with wisdom. May it be put down when its job is done." Both lines have become favorite touchstones of wisdom on fan forums, spanning the vast God of War community. "Our fans are the ultimate curators of wisdom for us," says Jeff Ketchum, a senior producer at SMS, who oversees studio marketing, PR, and community relations. "We really do value our community's input and pay close attention to when they speak. We're always looking at what fans find compelling and what they celebrate, and we always try to respond to that." The team also revamped Kratos' shield abilities and added slick new functionality to the Blades of Chaos, now wielded as a sling to hurl objects or as grappling hooks for traversal. Chef and his co-lead Danny Yeh also focused on an extensive redesign of the progression and RPG systems. We wanted to make the build system for Kratos much more robust and engaging so he could be played in a variety of ways, says Chef. Perhaps the most crucial and challenging piece of God of War Ragnarok gameplay redesign was recasting Atreus as the primary playable character for significant stretches of the game. The first time a God of War title ever featured a protagonist other than Kratos, setting aside Ascension's multiplayer mode. Obviously, we felt a huge responsibility to make this smaller, more agile kid just as much fun to play as Kratos, and also serve the story's needs, says Chef. Williams wanted Atreus to feature the same in-game skill trees, whether he was the playable or companion character. The request made the switch to playing Atreus more natural and seamless, but added significant complexity. All Atreus' abilities had to be secretly mapped in two different functionalities. Combat designer Hayato Yoshidomi was our prime mover on Atreus, who pushed for the resources we needed to craft that melding of his twin roles, says Chef. Companionship. Designing dynamic, believable companion characters makes the game feel less lonely, I think. I know that's a funny term to use, but I do think there's a sense of, pardon the pun, companionship, literally, when you're playing the game with one of these fully realized characters by your side, moving through a hostile world together. It opens a lot of compelling narrative doors, too. Mither Chef, Combat Design Lead. New family in the volume. The stellar God of War cast: Chris Judge, who plays Kratos, Sonny Suljic, who plays Atreus, Danielle Bisutti, who plays Freya, Alistair Duncan, who plays Mimir, Robert Craighead, who plays Brock, and Adam J. Harrington, who plays Sindri, returned intact for the sequel. New characters from the Norse pantheon with prominent roles in God of War Ragnarok would include Odin, Thor, Tyr, and Angrboda. Early in the casting process, Eric Williams and his narrative team had Richard Schiff atop their wish list for the Odin role and targeted Ryan Hurst as Thor. We'd always pictured the Aesir gods as like a biker gang, and we wanted Thor to be this massive, deep-voiced guy, says Matt Sophos. A bunch of us were fans of Sons of Anarchy, the FX TV series about a brutal outlaw motorcycle club, and everybody loved Ryan Hurst as the big biker Opie Winston in that show. His huge presence, Hurst is 6'6", and persona, We've always talked about Ryan as being a perfect reference point for Thor, and then we thought, why not just go get the guy? Eventually, Hearst invited the team to his house in the San Fernando Valley and listened to their 6-hour pitch of the God of War Ragnarok narrative. He found himself surprised and captivated by what he calls the majesty and intricately emotional relevance of their story. Hearst smiles and adds, so I was like, all right, let's do it. Pool noodles in the crucible. I'd never done mocap before, and it was beautiful. I loved it. Someone's putting dots on your face, wrapping a camera around your head, and then action. And off you go. No stopping like a stage play. Scenes going 5-6 minutes long. No cuts. Your props are pool noodles. I love that feeling, that pressure. It's like this crucible that makes everybody show up and bring their best game. I love my scenes with Chris, too. Kratos and Thor. All those grunts in that first meeting said a lot. Both of us are these huge, powerful gods, born and bred to be warriors and destroyers, just killers of things. And yet, despite such immense baggage, we're both just trying to be better fathers. Later, this god of thunder, this mighty being, well, he's forced to slump in front of his beloved daughter, Third, and say, plainly and drunkenly, I fucked up. Nothing could be more excruciating. Mina Sundwell, who plays Thrud, just broke my heart in that scene. Funny story, though, about Chris. For the first table read, our first work together, I'd prepare this resonant voice, low and deep in the chest, with an openness I worked on a lot. So we're all at Santa Monica, sitting in a circle. I deliver my first line. Chris leaps out of his chair and goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. This motherfucker is trying to outbass me? Then he laughed his huge laugh and came over and gave me a bear hug. And at that moment I knew this gig was going to be fun. That's from Ryan Hurst on playing Thor in God of War Ragnarok. In Richard Schiff's case, Santa Monica Studio owes his participation in God of War Ragnarok to a kid named Gus. Schiff was driving when he took a call on the car speakerphone from his manager about the Odin role. His son Gus was in the car. When Gus heard God of War, recalls Schiff, he nearly hit the roof, and he was yelling like, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. I never thought we could get Richard, says Williams. But Gus, he was the clincher man. We took good care of Gus after that. As for how to play the role, Schiff asked Williams how he saw Odin, the great manipulator. I told him, chess hustler, says Williams. That guy sitting in the park in New York City, eating a bagel, friendly, easy banter. You sit down, $5 a game, pretty soon your wallet is empty. And Richard was like, right, I got it. Richard understood that nobody ever thinks they're the bad guy, says narrative director Matt Sophos. Everybody's the hero of their own story, right? That's how he saw Odin. He's not the cartoon villain. In his mind, he just wants to stop Ragnarok. He tells you that he wants to save you, your dad, your loved ones, everybody's loved ones. What's bad about that? Richard was so perfect for that role, that clever sociopath who knows how to push your buttons to make you think you're somehow in it together. Who is Odin? I saw this nature documentary once. 2 big insects were fighting to the death over a female. While they were slashing each other to pieces, this smaller male insect slips in and mates with the female. Clearly, the little guy orchestrated that fight somehow. Odin is that little insect. Uses his smarts, his wiles, to gauge the situation, manipulate it to his advantage, and get what he wants. It doesn't matter to him that other people are tearing each other apart. Odin is that classic sociopath of any era, the guy who convinces himself that he's doing good things for everyone by attending to his own narcissistic obsessions. And that's Richard Schiff on playing Odin in God of War Ragnarok. Inside look, God of War's other father-son dynamic. I was really fascinated by their choice, casting me as Odin. I mean, Chris and Ryan, Kratos and Thor, are both truly massive, imposing men. Such a great contrast, me standing next to them. And man, Ryan played Thor's pain so beautifully. I loved what he did. Facing relentless humiliation from Odin, you found that octave in Thor's voice, an entire resonant emotional life expressed in it. Ryan is amazing, he nailed it. And that's Richard Schiff on Odin and Thor. Richard was just masterful, the way he channeled Odin's psychological power. That first scene when Thor's with Kratos in the Wild Woods hut and Odin shows up. Man, I just sort of opened my heart and let Richard trample on it. His Odin is so demeaning at first. He's darkly funny and cruel. And then, in an instant, he just completely dismisses Thor's presence, as if he's not even there. Psychology says that can be worse than even physical or verbal abuse. The son just doesn't matter to the father. Nothing is more devastating. And that's Ryan Hurst on Thor and Odin. Another central newcomer to the God of War narrative is Tyr, played with brilliant subtlety by the Australian actor Ben Pendergrast. The real Tyr is the Aesir God of War, long ago imprisoned in Asgard by Odin. But the Tyr we first meet in the game is, spoiler alert, in fact Odin, using dark magic to impersonate Tyr. When Pendergast auditioned and got the role, the SMS team did not reveal Tyr's terrible secret identity to him until his first day on the set. I actually suggested not telling Ben at all, says Williams, so he'd play Tyr straight up all the way to the end. But Matt and Rich disagreed, so we revealed the evil twist, and I'm so glad we did. The deft little character touches Ben added, the sneaky trail leading to Odin, it was just fantastic. For his part, Pendergrast admits being floored by the revelation, but immediately embraced how clever his portrayal could be. So now there's nefarious purpose behind every word I speak, in every scene, he says. Ultimately, the whole performance has a duality of intent. It's Odin trying to sell himself as Tyr, even to people like Mimir and Freya, who knew Tyr before his captivity, while still trying to manipulate the situation to his advantage. Every take, every line, it's like, how much can we do without chipping our hand to the audience, says Pendergrast. I'm asking Eric or Matt, hey, is this infection too obvious? Might it be a spoiler, or can I push it a bit more? So these two gods step up to a T. Yeah, so I play golf with Chris. Imagine the Greek and Norse gods of war hitting golf balls. If you ever wanted to hear Kratos scream expletives, that would be Chris hitting a drive. But he's usually a monster off the tee. One time I ripped my driver, an absolutely great shot, and my ball ended up about 6 yards in front of his. I was like, ha, Chris, I got you. And he turns to me and says, Ben, that was my 3-wood. Today, there isn't anyone on that cast that I couldn't pick up the phone and call to just go hang out. Alistair, he's now one of my best friends. Chris is one of my best mates. Adam, Robert, Danielle, Sonny. Those 4 years we spent on the set, getting past COVID and everything, really drew us together. Every one of them is just a really, really good person. We had great fun, lots of great memories. A favorite? Well, every day Chris walked onto the set, he let out this loud whoop, like, woo! The rest of us, every day, we just waited for that whoop. It was like a drug for us. It meant the day had officially started. And that's Ben Prendergast, who played Tyr on his God of War Ragnarok mates. Now, Sophos was mesmerized by the breadcrumb trail Pendergast was dropping in his performance. I think it became a fun game for him, he says, laughing. Like, how far could he go without blowing his cover? For some God of War fans, scrutinizing Tyr's odd glances and pauses on a second viewing became the equivalent of rewatching The Sixth Sense to find the clues that Bruce Willis is dead. If you've never watched The Sixth Sense, we deeply apologize. Prendergast's favorite breadcrumb moment in the scene in Sindri's house, where Kratos and Atreus are engaged in an argument that was slyly instigated by Tyr/Odin. Tyr stands in the background of the stove, stirring a pot. It was a moment and metaphorical prop that Prendergast had specifically suggested. My crowning glory, dramaturgically, he says, laughing. Tyr literally stirring the pot. You'll note that he's a lot happier in that scene, almost giddy, because Odin is getting the result he's been pushing for. Leia de Leon Hayes was just 14 when she auditioned for the critical role of Angrboda. The team had already singled her out in the first batch of auditions, and then her callback chemistry read with Sonny Suljic, Atreus, was exceptional. It's funny, because Sonny came into that reading very casual, whereas Leia was super prepared, says Eric Williams. Memorized everything, no scripts or prompts needed. And man, she just smoked it. Afterward, the team asked for Suljic's reaction. He said something like, "Yeah, she's really good," says Williams. And we were all thinking, dude, she destroyed you out there. Suljic also vividly remembers that reading. Rich Gaubert, lead writer, had to keep feeding him his lines and admits he was a bit embarrassed. "Yeah, I never came into the volume unprepared again," he says. Hayes recalls her first production meeting after getting the part, a lunch with Williams and Sophos that she says kicked off a supportive and remarkably collaborative relationship. From that first day, it was a fun, easygoing, safe place to be, she says. I totally trusted them, and even though I was the new kid on the first day of school, they trusted me too. They wanted my input on the character. They said, "Hey, you're 14. Help us figure out who Angraboda is, what she's like." Sophos says that lunch meeting was set a tone they wanted for their young actors. It was important to us to let Sonny and Leia feel free to be totally their age, to just be a couple of kids on and off the set, he says. And we wanted them to be comfortable with the Atreus-Angraboda relationship. One thing Hayes says she'll never forget is working her scenes with Deborah Wilson, a method actor. Wilson arrived on set already locked into her terrifying character of Grillia, Angraboda's monstrous grandmother. "It's still one of the most impactful experiences I've ever had as an actor," says Hayes. "I had no warning. Deborah was all in. That day taught me so much about the craft. I think about it all the time." When the day was over, Wilson was immediately herself, joking and talking about her pet spiders. And she said, "Thank you for letting me do that." Who is Angraboda? She started off as a smaller part of the story, but the character kept growing as we kept filming. Her big heroic arrival with Fenrir at Ragnarok was not in their plans at first. It was special doing that because we shot the Ragnarok scenes on the last day of mocap filming, and the whole cast was there. Seeing that scene in the game, I was very happy and proud. I started filming the game when I was 14 and finished when I was 17. The idea of taking ownership and agency over your life, writing your own story, it's a big theme in God of War Ragnarok. I love that Atreus and Angraboda could teach that to each other and carry out that theme. That cast was already a close family before I hopped aboard, and they took me right in. The set was so great, so laid back and fun, and it started right at the top with number one, the big guy, always cracking a joke, always having the best time. Chris Judge is just a wonderful person to have in your corner. He's Kratos, right? He's a huge deal, and yet he just makes everyone around him feel special. That's Leia DeLeon Hayes on playing Angraboda in God of War Ragnarok. Hayes also notes how she and Suljic hit it off from day one. "We truly had a chemistry, an unspoken trust, and everything felt natural," she says. "It's funny, I think the awkwardness between Atreus and Angraboda in their first meeting scenes worked so well because in real life, Sonny and I were also meeting each other for the first time. It's already awkward being 14, but then adding cameras in our face and mocap suits just elevates the awkward energy. I'm so grateful it started that way for us because as Angraboda and Atreus' friendship developed, so did mine and Sonny's. Also, when we first meet Angraboda in the game, she hasn't talked to anyone in years, so needless to say, it certainly worked in our character's favor. For his part, Suljic was thrilled to have a friend his own age on the set, talking about music and doing schoolwork with tutors between takes. "Dude, she's phenomenal," he says. "Leia brought us this new type of energy. It was super fun to film that scene scavenging through the mocap stage with Grillia screaming at us. Man, I loved watching their scenes together. Two young kids as yet unencumbered by the messiness of Hollywood," laughs Chris Judge, who frequently came to the set on days he wasn't shooting a scene. So young and so authentic. To watch the 100% honesty in their work was just magnificent. Judge himself was deeply encumbered, but not by Hollywood at that point. Rather, the former college football player, he'd been a first-team All-Pac-10 conference safety at Oregon in 1984, was suffering from a debilitating set of injuries. In August of 2019, Judge was forced to undergo 4 separate surgeries, 2 hip replacements, a foot procedure, plus a bilateral laminectomy in his back to relieve the crippling pain that had hampered him on the set during the early shooting. My limp was so bad in those early scenes, they couldn't even fix it in post-production, he says. His post-op recovery was remarkably swift, but it still set back his motion capture schedule by almost 4 months. Of course, Judge's surgery saga was just the opening salvo in the assault on God of War Ragnarok's shooting calendar. Not long after his return to the set in early 2020, the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic closed the volume mocap stage for 9 long months. When the cast finally returned, they found themselves on a tightly controlled set with stringent safety precautions. Here, there's Christopher Judge, Alistair Duncan, Richard Schiff, Brett Dalton, right in the back there, Danielle Basutti, Ben Pendergrast, Sonny Soljic, Robert Craighead, and James Mathis III at the Volume Santa Monica Studios motion capture stage. Inside look, a lighthouse in the time of COVID. In 2020, as everyone recalls, the global COVID pandemic disrupted nearly every aspect of life. The God of War Ragnarok development cycle was certainly not immune to that disruption. When the nationwide lockdown began in March of that year, Santa Monica Studios sent its workforce home and began the painstaking process of building a secure network and protocols for remote work. Like probably most other companies, we put together a task force, as Megan Morgan Giunino, the director of product development for God of War Ragnarok, who oversaw the studio's development to its remote phase. Folks from our IT team and studio operations, studio head Yumi Yang, myself, and a couple others. First, it was just, how do we get everybody safely out of the building? Then we started focusing on all the things we could or couldn't do with a fully remote team. God of War Ragnarok gameplay technical director John Burke's description of the new remote work reality echoed what every other SMS team lead told us. The problem with not seeing my people daily at their desks wasn't, gosh, are they slacking off, he says. I mean, that is just never an issue in this studio. Here, the problem is just the opposite. It's more like, who's pushing too hard? Who needs a break? In person, you can visibly see stress accumulate and focus on keeping everyone fresh and healthy and sane. For me, that was the hardest adjustment to this wild new world of all video game meetings. Eric Williams recalls a lighthouse metaphor he picked up somewhere about the director's role on any creative project. Your job is to keep the beacon lit, weather the storms, and bring the boats home, he says. But once COVID hit and everybody went remote, the lighthouse suddenly became almost more literal than figurative. Somebody had to make sure everybody was still seeing the light, he says. In the end, Williams and the rest of the dev team were grateful for the sure guidance from Sony and Santa Monica studio leadership that helped keep everyone safe as production lurched forward through the pandemic. I won't lie, every day on God of War Ragnarok was an adventure, says Williams. Everything that could possibly go wrong kind of went wrong, and there were some dark times. But Santa Monica Studio won't bemoan the inconveniences COVID inflicted, not when the whole world was suffering. In the end, says Williams, just being able to work every day with great people on something everyone loved was a blessing. And the game itself, God of War Ragnarok, became the lighthouse. Inside look, in service to the story. To all things housed in her silence, nature offers a violence. The winter sunrise, red on white, like blood upon the snow. From the Grammy-nominated song Blood Upon the Snow by Bear McCreary and Hozier, written for the God of War Ragnarok original soundtrack. Over the years, working with Sony teams, I'd come up with ideas about how music could be more effective in games. Ultimately, sound and music, it's just audio, right? But on a fundamental level, it's part of the emotional experience of the story. What it sounds like, what are its textures, and Sony would listen, roll up their sleeves, and say, you know what, let's do it. And they'd end up writing a new audio engine. They did that a couple of times for us. That's one thing I love about working with Santa Monica Studio. People there think about narrative and tone and character in such a very intuitive way. They're dedicated to making each game a meaningful emotional experience at those essential levels, including image and sound. And their big picture goal, Telling a deep, moving story ends up being so helpful to me with the music. I get excited by story, so even when I'm doing combat music or exploration music or boss battle music, I'm only thinking about the story. For example, when scoring a scene, I'd ask Matt Sophos, what's the background conflict? What do we want the audience to understand? What do we want them to feel? I would take the answers to those questions and convert them to quarter notes and whole notes and French horns and strings. In the first few minutes of meeting Cory Barlog, I knew we'd get along because that's how he thinks too. To him, all this stuff we do is in service to the story. And again, on God of War Ragnarok with Eric Williams, well, we were following up on such great success in God of War. Sometimes the worst ingredient to add in a creative endeavor is self-imposed pressure to recreate some nebulous greatness. But the truth is, you must take risks to be great. So I struggled early on God of War Ragnarok, particularly with Atreus. He didn't get his own theme in the 2018 game because that story was about his allegiances to his mother, then his father, and where he lands on that spectrum. There was no big moment for Atreus, no narrative beat, no single moment he comes of age or whatever. But then, that's entirely what God of War Ragnarok was about. Atreus coming into his own and Kratos letting go. Many of us with kids can relate, right? One day you stop seeing this combination of you and your spouse, and instead you see this new entity, one who's different from both of you. In God of War Ragnarok, I saw Atreus as the scrappy opposite of Kratos. So I took all these Nordic folk instruments and had them playing power chords really fast like punk rock and turned the three notes of Kratos' iconic theme upside down to make Atreus' theme, A Sun's Path. Other pieces were difficult too. Odin's theme was tough. He's a very nuanced character, and I spent a lot of time talking to Matt about this, All-Father, and his motivation. He's complex. Odin lies to everyone. He lies to himself. Like, does he even know his own motivation? Is it knowledge, power, fear? All of the above. It led to a very nuanced and layered piece of music. The most contentious task was redoing Kratos' theme. The studio was divided on that. Some wanted it unchanged, it's iconic. Let's give fans what they already know and love. But I was on the side that thought, our job is to give fans what they don't know they want yet. And the studio listened to me. Look, creative people thrive in an environment where we can speak our minds and be heard. That's another thing I love about working with Santa Monica Studio. So anyway, I just feel like it's in my sacred duty to protect the story at the end of the day. I made some subtle adjustments for Kratos. His theme now incorporates both Faye's and Atreus' themes, puts their stamps on Kratos. His theme cannot be stated without theirs, almost like Kratos getting a tattoo of their names on his arm. I think our God of War Ragnarok version of the Kratos theme sums up his character arc and encapsulates the spirit of the entire Norse saga. And that was from Beer McCrary, composer of the God of War Ragnarok score. Steering the flagship home. Megan Morgan, Junino, joined Santa Monica Studio as a senior production manager back in July 2015. She remembers the final weeks of her first God of War in 2018 as a thrilling time laden with seemingly insurmountable obstacles. I was very skeptical and nervous, she recalls. I thought there was no way we'd get all this done. I told Cory we should cut the boat sequences. I offered all kinds of radical producery solutions. We had some heated conversations back then. Cory called this time the Valley of Doubt for the whole team, and it certainly was for me. Morgan Janino laughs about it now, of course. As she explains, then I watched all these seasoned, talented, amazing people pull everything together and produce the hands-down game of the year. That's why 4 years later, as God of War Ragnarok sprinted towards its November 2022 finish line, with the dev team swinging hammers at the usual whack-a-mole array of last-minute crises, Morgan Janino, now director of product development, was not skeptical or nervous. Yes, God of War Ragnarok was a significantly bigger game, with far greater complexities than its predecessor. Combat lead Mihir Sheth points to the immense difficulty of refining 7 new companion characters. I mean, the increase in scope on just their basic behaviors was truly insane. Gameplay director Jeet Shroff recalls his team's struggles with fine-tuning big-ticket items like the wolf sled, the spear, dragons, and some big narrative moments. As always, he says, it felt like a few million things piled up on our plate. But as Morgan Giannino says, after that 2018 cycle, I knew the teams, I knew the people and what we could collectively achieve. Even with all the crazy complications of the COVID pandemic thrown in too, I had no doubt whatsoever that we'd come through with a great game on a reasonable timeline. It wasn't easy, she admits, but the results speak for themselves. Morgan Giannino, Shroff, Sheth, and others across departments all point to the studio's secret 11th hour ingredient. SMS can always rely on dev teams layered deep with experience on the God of War franchise. In many cases, more than a decade, art, design, production, engineering, almost every department featured a strong, steady veteran core. And for God of War Ragnarok, of course, that started at the top. Apart from maybe Corey, nobody knows God of War as deeply and intimately as Eric Williams, says Shroff. Plus, he's such a good technician, very precise. That really helped my gameplay team down the home stretch, especially with so much work still being completed and monitored remotely. A number of us had been through this a few times together, says Yumi Yang, studio head. Our leadership style at this studio has always been service-focused, that upside-down pyramid where our job as directors is to serve and support all the other layers of the pyramid. God of War Ragnarok released on November 9th, 2022, and quickly broke sales records for PlayStation first-party titles. Time magazine named it the best video game of 2022. Over the next year, God of War Ragnarok collected dozens of nominations for major gaming industry awards, eventually winning in categories that included Adventure Game of the Year, Best Performance, Christopher Judge's Kratos, Best Narrative Story, Best Audio Design, Best Sound Design, Best Technology, Best Score and Music from Bear McCreary, Best Original Song, Hosier McCreary for Blood Upon the Snow, Outstanding Achievement in Animation, and Outstanding Achievement in Music and Sound Editing. Here, it shows Kurt Markowitz and Megan Morgan Giannino in a conference room at the Playa Vista campus. Trusting the process. Before coming to Santa Monica Studio, I worked on big titles with extremely creative, talented people. But here, there's this consistent studio-wide commitment and drive and passion built on a foundation of support that frankly I'd never seen anywhere before. In my role now, I tell new people, especially those coming into leadership roles, to trust our process. Something may look impossible. No way we can accomplish this, not a chance. But just take it one step at a time and pay attention to how we support each other around here along the way. That's how you deliver reliably under pressure. Trust and support your team. That's the real DNA of this franchise. Megan Morgan Giannino, Director of Product Development on God of War Ragnarok. Here it's showing the award here. Inside look, Heel Molnir. In interviews, God of War Ragnarok cast members often refer to how the studio's narrative team solicited their thoughts on scenic details, encouraging them to take agency in their own characters. Ryan Hurst from Thor provides a perfect example of this sort of collaboration. Hurst and his wife, the actress Molly Cookson, are animal lovers who train rescue dogs and usually have several of their own as pets at any given time. One day on the set, Hurst made a suggestion. Wouldn't it be great if Mjolnir, Thor's enchanted hammer, was almost like his pet dog, with canine-like behavior at times? The team, of course, loved the idea, and Mjolnir's sentence was subtly integrated into Thor's scenes. For example, he could call his hammer to heel with a snap of his fingers. Here it's showing more awards. The award case at Santa Monica Studio headquarters featuring 7 DICE awards, including Adventure Game of the Year for God of War Ragnarok. At times, it seemed almost unfair. Overall, God of War Ragnarok was nominated for a record 12 DICE Awards, winning 7. At the BAFTA Games Awards, God of War Ragnarok received a record 15 nominations, including 4 of the 6 nominees for Best Performer in a Supporting Role, won by Leia de Leon Hayes for Angrboda. Nominated in 14 different categories at the Game Audio Network Guild Awards, God of War Ragnarok won all 14 of them. The title also won 2 coveted Favorite Game Awards chosen by public vote, the Audience Award at the 23rd Annual Game Developers' Choice Awards, and the BAFTA EE Game of the Year Award. And finally, Bear McCreary's work on God of War Ragnarok was nominated for Best Score Soundtrack for Video Games and Other Interactive Media at the 66th Annual Grammy Awards. Inside Look, Disagreeing Your Way to Greatness. So many subtle intangibles go into making this franchise great, and I believe only the special people at Santa Monica Studio could have conjured this mysterious magic. It's certainly not something you learn how to manage in Harvard Business Review. Alan Becker and Shannon Studstill built a culture and a legacy unlike any in this industry, and then Yumi Yang guided the construction of another brilliant layer on top. It's a very special setup, and speaking as someone with, God help me, 35 years of experience in this industry, you just don't see anything like this setup anywhere else. It starts with a keen eye for talent, finding and empowering great creative and technical people. These days, post God of War Ragnarok, you've got Corey as the architect and master visionary, overseeing all these great veterans, like J-Mac, who's instrumental in creating the feel of the franchise, and new directorial stars like Mihir, Chef, and Bruno Velasquez, who absolutely crushed it on Valhalla. And then you've got Eric as the glue between every single project. These days, Corey and Eric are leading the expansion of the franchise in very exciting ways. Their influence is irreplaceable, and part of it stems from the nature of their relationship. They've both been with God of War since its earliest days, right? Over the years, Corey will say this is the story. Then Eric says, but what about this? Corey says, no, but wait, okay, that's an interesting idea. Here's how it can work. And Eric says, well, we don't have time to do that, but maybe try this to make it work. They argue with passion, then finally agree or agree to disagree, and then you end up with yet another Game of the Year candidate. And that was from Scott Rode, head of internal production at PlayStation Studios. A coda to the community. We can't wrap up our retrospective look at God of War Ragnarok without a quick mention of the remarkable gift that Santa Monica Studio passed on to its fan base for free, a spectacular DLC story and gameplay extension called God of War Ragnarok Valhalla that caps Kratos' Norse saga in a deeply satisfying manner. Based on the popular rogue-like combat genre, Valhalla pits Kratos against waves of enemies through randomized levels, each ending in a boss confrontation against an important figure from his past. Co-directed by Bruno Velasquez and Mihir Chef, the experience functions as a perfect epilogue to not only the Norse cycle, but also Kratos' entire character arc, bringing back early franchise themes and cameo appearances by major figures from God of War's Greek era. For an illuminating perspective on Christopher Judge's remarkable performance in Valhalla's dramatic final confrontation, check out the behind-the-scenes peek from Ben Pendergrast on this page. God of War Ragnarok Valhalla. Kratos vs. Kratos in Valhalla. In God of War Ragnarok Valhalla, the God of War Ragnarok DLC, Kratos comes face to face with his younger self, effectively facing off against his past, all the rage and violence and regrets. He finds young Kratos sitting on his Greek throne, and on the day that we filmed it, I had the privilege of playing that role against Chris. So I'm delivering the young Kratos lines with all the vitriol and hate and steel that I can. Then I watch Chris go where he needs to go, as an actor in response. Chris's Kratos is taking the measure of his younger self, wondering what his path has been and where it should go. And it was just stunning. That monologue required a deft touch, and to me it transcended a regular performance. You know, Chris is a fantastic father to his boys, a thoughtful father. I also have 2 older boys. How to raise good young men, how to progress masculinity in Western society is one thing the game is advocating for. But we all make mistakes, right? Chris had to go deep into that place, because otherwise it doesn't translate. It's not felt. Anyway, I watched Chris dig down and deliver on that moment. He's just a powerhouse in every way. As an actor, a man, a father. Because of that, we have a piece of popular culture, God of War, breaking through to affect people's lives. And that was from Ben Prendergast, who played Tyr. I'm Chris Judge's Kratos. Epilogue. A seething, damaged god, racked with regret and tormented by blood-stained memories, staggers north out of his Greek homeland. The sojourn leads him to a new land with a new pantheon of enemies, but also to a worthy partner, a gifted son, a surrogate family, and eventually to a new status as beloved general. Now he serves a council of realms devoted to peace and justice after eons of nearly endless war. Sounds like a great story, right? As God of War's Norse cycle closed, a sweeping consensus of assessors, critics and fans alike agreed that the Norse saga had elevated the series to a level of narrative sophistication rarely seen in gaming. In fact, it elevated gaming itself, revealing what is possible. The God of War story had become richer, more resonant, and character-driven. Change is possible. Corey's horseback metaphor. Looking back over 2 decades of God of War, what was it like? I guess it reminds me of the first and last time I went horseback riding. I got talked into it during development of the first game. I climbed on, and it felt like being on a very large motorcycle, where, to a certain extent, I could rev the engine, control the speed, maybe rotate the thing. But you know what? It was actually this very huge living thing with its own wants and desires. Anyway, this smartass next to me slapped my horse's flank, and it took off galloping. Man, I've never felt that feeling. This runaway experience, being so out of control. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. That was God of War. I was trotting along on my horse and felt a little bit in control, and then that horse started to run. All I could do was hang on, settle in for the ride, and watch it take off in ways I couldn't have imagined at all. And that's from Corey Barlog, creative director of Santa Monica Studio. Ken Roy started out at Santa Monica Studio in 2001 as a Flash interface HUD designer on Connecticut, the studio's very first published game, and eventually worked on every God of War console title in franchise history. Today, in 2025, Roy serves as the studio's senior director of product development for all internal titles. We asked him the obvious question, the thing everybody wants to know. What's next? You never rest on your laurels in this business, he says. But how many studios can say that 5 of their 6 internal titles, released over 17 years, earned a score of 92 or higher on Metacritic, that 2 of those titles were each a Game of the Year, and that 2 of the other titles were nominated for Game of the Year? That's a crazy track record. And look, a lot of the people responsible for that record are still here. So, I think that bodes quite well for the future of this studio. Don't you think so? Yes, we think so. But will the flagship franchise continue? Will there be another God of War? Let's review the facts. In 2018, as Roy noted, a God of War title once again swept every major Game of the Year award for the second time. It also sold a whopping 25 million units. 4 years later, its sequel wrapped up the brilliant Norse saga, winning universal praise and another super-tanker shipload of industry honors. And, like its God of War predecessors from 2005 and 2018, God of War Ragnarok earned a lofty rating of 94 from the review aggregator Metacritic, ranking it among the highest-rated games of all time. And now here we stand, post-Ragnarok, wondering, will Kratos be back? Will we get to visit new mythological worlds and meet new gods and monsters and friends? Will our God of War retrospective book series add a 3rd volume someday? As Mimir once so blithely put it, speaking as the smartest man alive, I have no idea. As of this writing, Santa Monica Studio lips are sealed on this topic. But speaking for millions of fellow travelers walking in the footsteps of a valuable hero, A guy once so cruel and pitiless, now a loving father and a benevolent leader, seeking to be better and redeem his violent past. Well, we most certainly hope so. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the God of War 20th Anniversary Retrospective. I appreciate all of you watching this series inside of the Extreme Sleep series. Next up for the Extreme Sleep series, I believe we're going to take a look into the Mortal Kombat book that just came out. I appreciate all of you guys watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.